Over the last few days I've been concentrating on the engine and gearbox subframe. You can see this is the subframe here. What I've done here is I've drilled holes for and tapped them to 12BA to support the engine, and you can see the long screws that I've left in there. I mean, they will eventually be cut down to shorten. At the moment I've left them long just because I will be assembling and taking this apart on a regular basis. So rather than having to use a screwdriver, I can use my fingers. So that's the frame. One of the things I found was that the gearbox was slightly high, so I've adjusted the depth of the feet of the gearbox so that I can actually, you can see here, I can actually install a shaft which goes through the gearbox and into the engine and pops out the front of the engine, and that way I can get everything, make sure that everything is aligned properly. Then there's the differential. So it's not going to be a working differential, but I've got the parts of the differential here. This is the top part, and you can tell that by the fact it's got this bar across the top, which is the primary support. And I've made this brass piece to go in the middle. As you can see there, we're tightening notches around the side. Oh, just wrong way around. So when the two halves go together, it looks like that, suspended. On this end, there is the input connection. And what I've done is I've made the flange that goes on the end, connected it to this piece of brass, which would be the outer core for the drive shaft to the rear. And as you can see, that will go on there, and then, you know, once I've aligned the holes up and screwed the whole thing together, then that will be ready to go. It is too long. I'll sort the length out a little bit later on when I get the components mounted in the vehicle, and I can get an accurate dimension for them. So that's the rear differential. And then finally, I've been working on all of these parts. I've been working on the clutch. So it's a cone clutch, and this is the cone clutch plate, and you can probably see it's got a slight angle on it there. Here's the cone clutch. So this is the flywheel. This is the cone clutch plate, and that drops in there. And then there is another component that goes on like that. And this little piece on the end will be used for the forks to go in and basically lift the clutch up and down. And it will have, it'll be a working clutch, but it will be of little use as this is a static model. But I just thought I'd do that to add interest to the model. And then on the back end of that, there is this piece. In reality, this is this is actually a transmission joint, but because mine's a static model, I'm not going to do much with that. What I will have is I'll have a spring in there, which will allow the clutch plate to come in and out, and I'll show you a better idea of this later. So in that hole there will be a spring that will allow the clutch plate to come out, and this will be attached. Effectively, it will be on the end of the gearbox like that. So this whole drive chain will actually be dropped in there. So that's progress to date. I'm going to go off and start putting some things together. What I eventually intend to do is to mount this on the chassis, and that way I can make sure that all of the alignment is good, and I can get the exact measurements for some components, because I always find there's some scaling issues that appear when you're putting together long components. So doing it this way will allow me to effectively mitigate any scaling issues that I've made in the measurement and scaling down of the real truck. The last few days I've been focused on the subframe that supports the engine, the transmission, of the vehicle, and I've just recently fitted that subframe into the car. So as you can see here, this is the subframe, this piece here. I've had to make some brackets at the back here to support it, and also some bracket work in the front, and actually fitted the vehicle as well as the starting handle that I've made, which will be spring loaded, so it operates like the original when it's finally done. So now you can see the subframe in the assembly. You can see it hanging underneath. You may notice that it leans down slightly towards the back. That's correct, and that's what actually happens in the proper vehicle. So there's the subframe mounted. Next I'll go on and talk about the engine. So here's the block of the engine, which I did some detailing to some time ago. But what I've been doing recently is I've made the cone clutch flywheel, which is that piece there, which actually goes into the engine. I'll just slip that in like so. I've made the cone clutch, which is this component here, which goes on the back. So that's the cone clutch, and we'll move in and out. And at the front I've made this component, which is the drive belt drum for the fan belt, together with a little union, which you can see I've detailed by putting small nuts and bolts on. And that piece goes on there, and you have the engine, its flywheel. The front of this is cut away so that the starting handle will slot into there. Behind it there'll be a spring to push it forward. The next part of the drivetrain, of course, is the gearbox. So this is the gearbox here, relatively modest little thing with some detailing already on it. And what I've made is I've made the brake drum. So like in common with many vehicles, this vehicle has a transmission brake which sits on the back of the gearbox like so. So I've yet to make some brake shoes that will go in there. And then at the front of the vehicle, to represent the coupling, I've made this unit, which again you can see I've detailed with small bolts to simulate the coupling. And again, I bring the engine back. This will go into the engine, and actually there'll be sufficient space left to allow the clutch to come in and out. And I've left space within the end of this to insert a spring that will thrust the clutch into position. So that's the engine and the gearbox. I'll just move those to one side and move on finally to the differential. So you can see I've made the torque tube for the differential. That's sitting on the front of the differential. It's all detailed now. All of these long studs I've manufactured and put nuts and bolts on the end. They're 12 BA, and I've made a central infill piece into which I'll be putting the drive shafts once I've got those made. So I'm gonna slip all of this into the chassis now so that you can see what that looks like before I dismantle it all once again to proceed with painting of the brass components. So there are all those components mounted in the vehicle. Oops, sorry. So as you can see, starting with the front, you've got the starting handle, followed by the pulley which will drive the fan belt and drive the front cooling fan. I've got the clutch in here with a little bit of movement, as you can see, so it can be, let's see if I can get a, oops, take those off, they're not fixed yet. Take those, you can see the clutch, there's play in there which I will be using to make the clutch actually operate. Then you've got the clutch brake, or the transmission brake at the rear of the vehicle, and finally you can see the differential mounted into it as well. And that. That's a view from the underside of the vehicle. So as I say, now I'm going to take all that apart, paint the brass components with some self-etching primer prior to painting them the final colour.